I'm Sadie, 27, a medical resident who practically lives in hospital scrubs. Growing up in Michigan, I always stood in the shadow of my perfect older sister, Melissa. Our middle class family seemed normal from the outside, but inside those walls, I constantly felt like an afterthought. Last Christmas, everything came to a head when my parents handed Melissa keys to a brand new BMW while I unwrapped a $50 gift card. While I share how my family's favoritism reached its breaking point, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join our storytelling community. The smell of pine and cinnamon always takes me back to our family home in suburban Michigan. Growing up, our house was modest but comfortable, a testament to my father James's careful accounting career and my mother Linda's teacher salary. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, but beneath the surface, the dynamics were far more complicated. My sister Melissa is 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, she was the golden child. She had this natural charisma that drew people to her with her wavy blonde hair and confident smile. I can still picture her high school years vividly. Her walls plastered with achievement certificates, volleyball trophies lining her shelves, and that sparkly homecoming queen tiara displayed prominently on her dresser. When Melissa was accepted to the prestigious University of Michigan with a partial scholarship, my parents threw a massive party. They invited extended family neighbors and seemingly everyone from church. Dad gave a tearful speech about how proud he was, and Mom couldn't stop showing everyone the acceptance letter. Meanwhile, I was the quieter daughter with mousy brown hair and glasses, more comfortable with books than social gatherings. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't the standout that Melissa was. Still, I worked incredibly hard academically regularly, bringing home straight A's and eventually becoming captain of the debate team. The contrast in how our achievements were treated became apparent early. When I won the statewide math competition in 8th grade, my parents said a quick congratulations before rushing off to Melissa's volleyball tournament. My certificate ended up in the kitchen drawer, while Melissa's participant ribbons were framed in the hallway. Our bedrooms told the same story. When Melissa turned 14, my parents completely renovated her room with new furniture, a queen-sized bed, and walls painted in the exact shade of lavender she wanted. My room remained unchanged from childhood, with the same twin bed and faded pink walls I'd had since I was 7. Then there was our Sweet 16 celebrations. Melissa's was an elaborate affair at the country club my father occasionally splurged on for business connections. There was a professional photographer, custom cake, and even a hired DJ. My parents spent months planning it. For my 16th birthday, we had pizza in the backyard with a few friends. Mom forgot to order a cake, so we had grocery store cupcakes instead. "It's not the same," my mother would say when I occasionally found the courage to point out these differences. "Melissa needs the social boost for her future connections. Your strengths are different." My father was even more dismissive. "Sadie, you're comparing apples and oranges. Your sister excels in different ways than you do." The only person who seemed to notice the disparity was my mother's sister, Aunt Catherine. She lived a few hours away but visited several times a year. I remember one Thanksgiving when she pulled me aside after watching my parents fawn over Melissa's college application essays while completely ignoring the fact that I had just won a prestigious science competition. "You know you're extraordinary, right?" Aunt Catherine whispered, hugging me tight. Sometimes parents can be blind to the treasures right in front of them. Her words were a lifeline during those years, the only real validation I received. High school graduation should have been my moment. I was valedictorian, something neither of my parents had accomplished, and something Melissa hadn't achieved either. Yet during my speech, I could see my parents in the audience looking distracted. Later, I discovered they were texting with Melissa about her new marketing internship. At the celebration dinner afterward, they spent most of the time telling relatives about Melissa's new apartment rather than my scholarship offers. Despite the lack of enthusiasm from my parents, I decided to pursue my passion for medicine. I had always been fascinated by science and had volunteered at our local hospital throughout high school. When I told my parents about my plan to become a doctor, their response was lukewarm at best. "Medical school is very expensive, Sadie," my father cautioned. and extremely competitive. Maybe consider something more realistic. Melissa found such a great path with marketing, my mother added. Much better work-life balance, and she's already doing so well. Their doubts only fueled my determination. If I couldn't earn their love through my accomplishments at least, I could prove them wrong about my capabilities. I applied to pre-med programs and was accepted to several excellent universities. I chose State University, which offered me the best financial aid package, because despite my parents' comfortable income, they made it clear I would be largely responsible for my education costs. What I didn't realize then was that this pattern of favoritism would only grow more pronounced as Melissa and I entered adulthood, setting the stage for years of financial and emotional disparity that would eventually reach its breaking point. My college years marked the period when the divide between how my parents treated Melissa and me became impossible to ignore. While I was working 3 part-time jobs to cover textbooks and living expenses, my parents were helping Melissa with the down payment on her first apartment. The contrast was never more obvious than with our transportation situations. During Melissa's junior year of college, my parents surprised her with a used Honda Civic. It wasn't new, but it was reliable and perfect for a college student. She needs to be able to get to her internship safely, they explained. Meanwhile, I was taking the campus shuttle and public buses to my class's lab work and hospital volunteering. When winter came, that meant waiting at bus stops in freezing Michigan weather, often arriving to my morning classes with numb fingers and a runny nose. When I asked if they might help me with even a small down payment for a very used car, my father looked pained. "Sadie, we just don't have it in the budget right now. You know how to budget and be frugal, you'll be fine." I later discovered they had taken Melissa on a trip to New York City that same month as a reward for her hard work. The pattern was clear and painful. Despite these challenges, I excelled academically. I maintained a 3.9 GPA while juggling my pre-med coursework and multiple jobs. When I made the dean's list for the 4th consecutive semester, I excitedly called home to share the news. "That's nice, honey," my mother said distractedly. "Did I tell you Melissa's boss took her to lunch and said she has executive potential?" It was during my sophomore year that I met Jordan, who would become my lifeline. We were assigned as roommates after my original housing fell through. Jordan was studying psychology and noticed the dynamics with my family almost immediately. "Your parents called to check on you exactly once this semester, but they've sent you 5 packages addressed to Melissa and Sadie," she observed one day. "And every time you try to tell them about your accomplishments, they change the subject to your sister." Jordan's observation was like turning on a light in a dark room. Someone else could see it too. I wasn't imagining things or being too sensitive as my parents often claimed. When I came down with severe pneumonia during finals week of junior year, I ended up in the hospital for 3 days. I called my parents repeatedly, but they were attending Melissa's housewarming party for her new condo and said they couldn't get away right now, but would try to visit soon. They never came. It was Jordan who stayed by my hospital bed, who brought my assignments so I wouldn't fall behind, and who took detailed notes during my recovery. Her family even drove 3 hours to bring me homemade soup and check on me. "You're family to us now," Jordan's mother said, stroking my hair in a way my own mother rarely did. That moment changed something fundamental for me. I realized I could create my own family through the people who genuinely cared about me. Holiday breaks became particularly difficult. Going home meant watching my parents lavish attention and gifts on Melissa, while I received practical items with little thought. One Christmas, Melissa received diamond earrings while I got a planner and highlighters for medical school applications. Eventually, I started spending holidays with Jordan's family instead. When my parents questioned this, I carefully explained that I felt more comfortable there. Their response was telling. "You've always been so independent, Sadie," my mother said. "Melissa needs family time more than you do." The ultimate blow came when I was accepted to medical school. After years of work, perfect test scores, and countless volunteer hours, I got into one of the top programs in the country. I called my parents' voice shaking with excitement. "That's wonderful, sweetie," my mother said. "But can I call you back? We're taking Melissa out to celebrate her promotion to marketing manager." They never called back that day. 3 days later, I saw Facebook photos of them popping champagne at an expensive restaurant with Melissa with the caption, "Celebrating our amazing daughter's accomplishments." I tried once more to discuss the pattern with them during a rare visit home. "I feel like you don't value my achievements the same way you value Melissa's," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My father sighed heavily. "Sadie, you've always been competitive with your sister. We love you both equally, but you're too sensitive. You're imagining slights that aren't there." My mother nodded in agreement. "Melissa just needs more support. She's not as naturally gifted as you are." I left that conversation feeling like I was losing my mind. The gaslighting was effective, making me question whether I was indeed overreacting. It was only through conversations with Jordan, and later with my Aunt Catherine, that I confirmed I wasn't crazy for feeling overlooked and undervalued. As I packed my bags for medical school, I made a decision. I would stop seeking my parents' approval and focus on building a life that made me happy. I couldn't change their behavior, but I could change how much power it had over me. At least that was the plan. But emotional patterns established over a lifetime aren't so easily broken, and the worst was yet to come. Medical school hit me like a tsunami. The workload was intense, the pressure immense, and the financial burden crushing. Unlike many of my classmates whose parents were helping them, I was financing my education entirely through loans and whatever part-time work I could squeeze in between studying and clinical rotations. By the end of my first semester, I was already $70,000 in debt. The weight of that future financial burden kept me up at night, but I was determined to make it work. When an unexpected car repair drained my emergency fund, I reluctantly called my parents. "Dad, I hate to ask, but I'm in a tight spot. My car broke down and I need $800 for repairs. I can't get to my clinical rotations without it. I promise I'll pay you back once my loan disbursement comes through next month." There was a long pause on the line. "Sadie, we just don't have extra funds right now," my father finally said. "We're helping Melissa with some things and our budget is tight. Can you put it on a credit card?" I swallowed hard, thinking about my already maxed out card. "Sure, Dad. No problem. I'll figure it out." 2 days later, while eating ramen for the third night in a row, I made the mistake of checking Instagram. There was Melissa poolside at an all-inclusive resort in Cancun, cocktail in hand. The caption read, "Thanks Mom and Dad for the amazing graduation gift trip, love you guys, graduation gift," for completing her master's in marketing. The same parents who couldn't spare $800 for my transportation to hospital rotations had funded a luxury vacation for my sister. I sat on my worn couch in my tiny apartment, tears streaming down my face, feeling more alone than ever. That night I applied for another credit card with a terrible interest rate, because what choice did I have? It was during this low point that David entered my life. We met in an advanced pathophysiology class where we were partnered for a semester-long project. David noticed immediately that something was off. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said bluntly after our third study session. Too exhausted to maintain my usual walls, I told him everything: the lifelong favoritism, the financial struggles, the latest betrayal with the car repair, versus Melissa's vacation. Instead of the awkward platitudes I expected, David nodded with understanding. My brother was the golden child too. Not to the same extent, but I get it. It messes with your head, makes you question your worth. That simple acknowledgement was the beginning of both a beautiful friendship and eventually something more. David became my rock through the brutal medical school years. When I met his family, they welcomed me with warmth that felt alien yet wonderful. His mother, Sarah, treated me with the same affection she showed David, and his father, Michael, proudly introduced me as David's brilliant medical school colleague to everyone at family gatherings. Despite finding this emotional support, my financial situation remained precarious. I was excelling academically, ranking in the top 5% of my class. But the constant stress of making ends meet took its toll. During my third year, I developed severe migraines that landed me in the emergency room. The diagnosis was stress-induced, and the doctor recommended reducing my workload, an impossible suggestion for a medical student. The emergency room visit added another $2,000 to my growing debt, even with student health insurance. I didn't tell my parents about the health scare, but Aunt Catherine found out through a mutual friend. She called my parents concerned. Their reaction was telling. "Well, Sadie has always pushed herself too hard," my mother reportedly said. "She needs to learn balance." This was the same mother who had spent 2 weeks at Melissa's apartment taking care of her after a minor outpatient procedure the year before. Aunt Catherine was furious. "Your daughter is working herself to the bone to become a doctor, and you can't even call her when she ends up in the emergency room," she had demanded. According to Aunt Catherine, this led to a heated argument where she finally confronted my parents about their obvious favoritism. My father had become defensive while my mother burst into tears, claiming they loved both their daughters equally. The incident created a rift between Aunt Catherine and my parents, with them barely speaking for months afterward. Despite all these challenges, I completed medical school with honors. My graduation ceremony was on a beautiful May afternoon. David and Aunt Catherine sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Jordan and her parents drove in for the ceremony bearing gifts and flowers. My own parents arrived 10 minutes before the ceremony started and left immediately after citing a dinner reservation they had to make. "Melissa's in town for the weekend," my mother explained as they rushed off. "We promised we'd take her to that new fusion restaurant downtown." I stood there in my graduation regalia, watching them hurry to their car, feeling a familiar empty ache in my chest. David squeezed my hand. "Their loss," he said simply, and he was right. That evening, Aunt Catherine, David, Jordan, and her parents took me out for a proper celebration dinner. As we toasted to my achievement and future residency, I looked around the table at these people who had chosen to support me, to celebrate me, to love me without conditions. "You're going to be an amazing doctor," Aunt Catherine said, raising her glass again. "And these people here know it, even if your parents don't see what's right in front of them." I felt simultaneously heartbroken and incredibly fortunate. The path forward was going to be challenging, but for the first time I knew I had people in my corner who truly valued me. What I didn't know was that the worst betrayal was still to come. Starting my residency felt like beginning yet another marathon immediately after finishing one. The hours were brutal, often stretching to 80 hours a week. I would arrive at the hospital before sunrise and leave long after sunset, sometimes not seeing daylight for days at a time. The physical and mental exhaustion was unlike anything I had experienced before, but there was also a deep satisfaction in finally practicing medicine. During this intense period, David and I got engaged. It wasn't a grand proposal, just a quiet moment in my tiny apartment after I had worked a 36-hour shift. He had prepared dinner, cleaned my apartment, and was waiting with my favorite tea when I stumbled through the door, barely able to keep my eyes open. "I want to do this for you for the rest of our lives," he said simply, holding out a small ring with a modest diamond. "Will you marry me?" Even in my exhausted state, the answer was an immediate yes. We didn't plan for an elaborate wedding, agreeing to wait until after my residency, when we'd have more time and hopefully less debt. Our life together was modest but happy. We moved into a slightly larger apartment, combining our meager furnishings and creating a home that felt warm and safe. Throughout this time, I continued trying to maintain some relationship with my family. I called my parents weekly, though conversations were usually brief and centered around Melissa's latest accomplishments. I sent birthday and holiday cards. I made efforts to visit when my grueling schedule allowed, though these visits often left me feeling drained and undervalued. As Christmas approached during my second year of residency, my parents insisted that David and I join them and Melissa's family for the holiday. Melissa had recently married Brad, a sales executive she met through work, and they had purchased a house in the same neighborhood as our parents. It would mean so much to have everyone together, my mother said during one of our phone calls. Melissa has some exciting news to share. Despite my reservations, I requested the days off months in advance and was fortunately granted December 24th and 25th. David and I drove the 3 hours to my parents' home on Christmas Eve, arriving just before dinner. The house looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, with the same decorations, the same tree stand, even the same stockings. Mine looked noticeably less full than Melissa's, a detail David noticed immediately but kindly didn't mention. Melissa and Brad arrived shortly after us. Melissa looked as polished as ever in designer clothes, her hair perfectly styled. Brad was friendly enough, though he spent most of the evening talking to my father about golf and investments. During dinner, Melissa announced her exciting news. She had decided to leave her marketing director position for a less demanding role at a smaller company. The hours were just too much, she explained, and the commute was killing me. This new position is 10 minutes from our house and I'll be home by 5 every day. That's wonderful, sweetheart, my mother gushed. Your well-being comes first. I bit my tongue thinking about my 100-hour weeks and six-figure debt. When my mother asked about my residency, I barely got through describing a challenging case before the conversation shifted back to Melissa's new role and its only slightly reduced salary. Later, Melissa mentioned casually that she and Brad were considering starting a family soon. My parents were ecstatic, immediately launching into discussions of potential baby names and offering to convert their home office into a nursery for visits. The contrast to their reaction when David and I announced our engagement months earlier was stark. They had simply nodded and asked if we had set a date before changing the subject to Melissa's house renovation. On Christmas morning, we gathered around the tree for the traditional gift exchange. My parents handed David a box containing a generic tie and gift card to a chain restaurant. They gave me a set of basic scrubs and the aforementioned $50 gift card to a coffee shop chain. Practical gifts that acknowledged my career, but required minimal thought or investment. Then came Melissa and Brad's turns. Brad received an expensive watch that my father explained was an investment piece. And then my mother handed Melissa a small box with a giant smile. Inside was a key fob with the BMW logo prominently displayed. "Go look in the driveway," my father said excitedly. We all went to the window to see a brand new BMW X5 parked outside, complete with a massive red bow on top. The car had to cost at least $60,000, probably more with the customizations. "You've been working so hard," my mother said, hugging Melissa. "And now, with the new job having a shorter commute, we wanted to make sure you had reliable transportation." "We're so proud of you for prioritizing your happiness," my father added. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. David's hand found mine, squeezing tight in silent support. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Melissa squealed, hugging our parents and rushing outside to examine her new luxury vehicle. I remained by the window watching as my sister circled her expensive gift. Something inside me finally broke. After years of telling myself that the disparity in how my parents treated us wasn't as bad as it seemed, after years of making excuses for them, after years of trying to earn their approval through my achievements, I could no longer deny the truth. Nothing I ever did would be enough. No achievement would ever matter. My sister would always be the favorite, would always receive the lion's share of their love, attention, and financial support, while I, despite working myself to exhaustion in one of the most demanding careers possible, would always be an afterthought. I smiled mechanically through the rest of the morning, helping my mother prepare Christmas dinner, making small talk with Brad about hospitals from an insurance perspective, and congratulating Melissa on her beautiful new car. But inside, I was shattered, replaying a lifetime of similar moments when the message had been clearly communicated: Melissa mattered more. As we drove back to our apartment that evening, the $50 gift card burning a hole in my pocket, I finally allowed the tears to come. The drive home from my parents' house was mostly silent. David kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other firmly holding mine, occasionally squeezing it to remind me I wasn't alone. Snow began falling softly, creating a beautiful but isolating curtain around our car. When we were about halfway home, the emotions I had been suppressing all day finally erupted. I began sobbing so hard I could barely breathe, years of accumulated pain pouring out at once. David immediately pulled over at a rest stop, unbuckled my seatbelt, and pulled me into his arms as best he could across the center console of our modest used Honda. He held me while I cried, not trying to shush me or tell me it would be okay, just providing a safe space for my breakdown. "A $50 gift card, David," I finally choked out. After everything, after all the work, after becoming a doctor, despite them, they got me a coffee shop gift card. The same amount they probably spend on one dinner out, while Melissa gets a luxury car for quitting her job. "It's not fair," he agreed, his voice tight with anger on my behalf. "It's not right, and it's not fair." "What's wrong with me?" I whispered, voicing the question that had haunted me since childhood. "Why am I so unlovable to them?" David pulled back to look me in the eyes, his expression fierce. "Nothing is wrong with you, Sadie. Nothing. This is about them, not you. They have some kind of bizarre blind spot when it comes to appreciating who you are and what you've accomplished. But everyone else sees it, everyone who matters." We sat there for nearly an hour as I cycled through tears, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. By the time we resumed our journey, something had shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but alongside it was a new resolve. This would be the last Christmas I spent feeling like a beggar at my own family's table. The next morning I called Aunt Catherine and asked if she would be willing to be present for a conversation I needed to have with my parents. Without hesitation, she agreed, offering to drive to my parents' house the following day. "It's time," she said simply. "I've watched this happen for too long." I called my parents next, asking to meet them for coffee. My mother sounded surprised by my businesslike tone, but agreed. That night I barely slept, rehearsing what I wanted to say, gathering evidence of the pattern that had defined my life. David helped me compile financial records showing my student loans versus the support Melissa had received, and photographs from family events that told the story of our unequal treatment. The next day, Aunt Catherine met us at the coffee shop near my parents' house. She hugged me tightly. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "know that you are loved and valued exactly as you are." My parents arrived looking confused by the presence of David and Aunt Catherine. We sat at a quiet table in the corner, and I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about something that's been hurting me for as long as I can remember." I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "There has been a clear pattern of favoritism toward Melissa throughout our lives, and yesterday's Christmas gifts were the final straw." My father immediately became defensive. "Now, Sadie, you're being dramatic. We love both our daughters equally." "Please let me finish," I said firmly. "This isn't about love in the abstract. This is about actions that demonstrate value and priority. Throughout our lives, Melissa's achievements, needs, and desires have consistently been treated as more important than mine." I placed the folder of evidence on the table, opening it to show side-by-side photographs of our childhood bedrooms, our graduation celebrations, and finally a spreadsheet showing the financial discrepancy in what they had provided each of us. "You spent over $30,000 on Melissa's wedding but claimed you couldn't contribute to my medical school application fees," I pointed out. "You funded her master's degree but left me to accumulate crushing debt for medical school. You buy her new cars while I work 12-hour hospital shifts and take the bus when our car is in the shop because we can't afford a second vehicle." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I noticed they seemed more like tears of discomfort than remorse. "Melissa and you have different needs," she said weakly. "Different circumstances." "Yes," I agreed. "I work twice as many hours as she does in a profession that saves lives while accumulating debt that will take decades to repay. Those are indeed different circumstances." My father tried to change tactics. "We're proud of both of you, but in different ways. Melissa needed more guidance and support. You've always been so independent and capable." "Being capable doesn't mean I didn't need support," I replied. Being strong doesn't mean I didn't want my parents to show up for me the way they always showed up for my sister. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. At one point, my mother finally admitted something revealing. "I've always found it easier to connect with Melissa," she confessed. "She's more like me, more accessible. You were always so smart, so focused. Even as a little girl, you seemed like you were operating on a different level. It was intimidating." My father nodded in agreement. "You didn't seem to need us the way Melissa did. You were solving college-level math problems in elementary school. What could I possibly teach you or give you that you couldn't get for yourself?" I was stunned by this revelation. So I was punished for being capable, for having academic abilities. Did it ever occur to you that I still needed parents who showed up for my science fairs, who celebrated my achievements, who helped me navigate growing up just like any other child? Aunt Catherine, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "James, Linda, do you hear what you're saying? You've been emotionally and financially neglecting one daughter because she was academically gifted. How does that make sense?" My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father attempted to pivot again. "The BMW was a special situation," he insisted. "Melissa needed reliable transportation with winter coming. Her old car was having problems. And I don't need reliable transportation to get to the hospital for 30-hour shifts, to drive home safely when I'm exhausted after treating patients all day," I asked incredulously. The conversation began to go in circles, with my parents offering weak justifications and minimizing my feelings. When my mother suggested I was making mountains out of molehills, and that I should be happy for my sister's good fortune, something in me snapped. I stood up, gathering the evidence folder. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval and support. I've achieved things that should make any parent burst with pride, yet you barely acknowledge them. I'm done. I'm done trying to be enough for you because I've realized that's not possible." David stood beside me, his presence steady and supportive. "I need some distance," I continued. "I need time to heal from a lifetime of being treated as less than. And I need you to really reflect on the pattern I've shown you today, because if there's ever going to be a healthy relationship between us in the future, things need to change dramatically." With that, I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated. The confrontation hadn't gone as I'd hoped, but it was the first time I had truly stood up for myself, the first time I had named the dynamic that had shaped my life, and the first step toward whatever would come next. The week following the confrontation with my parents was one of the most emotionally turbulent of my life. I cycled through feelings of guilt, liberation, doubt, anger, grief, and occasional moments of peace. I questioned everything about my identity and my place in my family. David was my rock throughout this period. He made sure I ate regular meals, reminded me to take breaks during my hospital shifts, and held me through the nights when memories kept me awake. His steady presence was a constant reminder that I was worthy of unconditional love. Jordan called daily, checking in and providing the perspective of someone who had witnessed the dynamic with my family for years. "You did the right thing," she reassured me repeatedly. "This has been a long time coming." 4 days after the confrontation, I received a text from Melissa asking to meet. I was hesitant but agreed to coffee at a neutral location. She arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued, her usual polish slightly dimmed. "Mom and Dad told me about your conversation," she began after we had settled with our drinks. "I had no idea you felt this way." I looked at her skeptically. "Really, Melissa? You never noticed that they treated us differently, that they showered you with attention and support while barely acknowledging my existence?" She fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I knew they were more involved with my life, but I thought that was because we had more in common. And honestly, Sadie, you've always been so smart and together. I never thought you needed them the way I did." "Everyone needs their parents," I said quietly. "Everyone deserves to be valued equally in a family." Melissa nodded slowly. "I get that now. And for what it's worth, I've always been a little jealous of you. You knew what you wanted and went after it with such determination." I always felt like I was floundering trying to find my place. This admission surprised me. I had never considered that Melissa might have her own insecurities, or that she might have envied anything about me. The BMW was too much, she admitted. When they gave me those keys, even I was shocked. I knew they helped me more than you, but seeing it so blatantly on Christmas Day made me uncomfortable. Did you say anything to them? I asked. She looked down. No, and that's on me. I've benefited from their favoritism my whole life without questioning it. I should have spoken up. Her acknowledgement was something, but her next words revealed the limits of her understanding. I could talk to them for you, she offered. Tell them to be more fair going forward. I shook my head. This isn't about you interceding on my behalf, Melissa. This is about a fundamental problem in our family dynamic that's existed since we were children. They need to recognize it and want to change it themselves, not just do it because you suggested it. Our conversation continued for about an hour. While Melissa expressed what seemed like genuine regret, there was still a paternalistic tone to her offers of help, as if she was doing me a favor from her position of parental favor. We parted on civil terms, but I left feeling that she had understood only a fraction of the issue. That weekend, I attended my first therapy session. Finding the time had been challenging with my residency schedule, but I had finally secured a slot with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and could accommodate evening appointments. Dr. Larson was a warm, insightful woman who listened carefully as I poured out the story of my family dynamic. By the end of our 90-minute session, I was emotionally exhausted, but felt a glimmer of hope. What you're describing is a classic case of family favoritism, she explained, and the impacts can be profound and long-lasting. Children who experience this often struggle with self-worth perfectionism and difficulties in relationships. But recognition is the first step toward healing, and you've already taken that brave step. As I continued with weekly therapy sessions, I began to understand how deeply the favoritism had shaped my self-perception. My drive for perfection, my tendency to overwork my difficulty accepting help all were rooted in a childhood where I was implicitly taught that I needed to earn love through achievement, and even then it might not be enough. At the hospital, my mentor, Dr. Rivera, noticed the change in me. During a rare quiet moment in the doctor's lounge, she asked if everything was all right. Something about her genuine concern broke through my professional facade, and I found myself confiding in her about the family situation. To my surprise, she nodded with understanding. My father always favored my brothers, she shared. In our Latino household, sons were valued more highly than daughters. I became a doctor partly to prove I was just as capable, just as worthy of investment and pride. It took me years to realize that his limitations weren't a reflection of my value. Her words resonated deeply, reinforcing what I was learning in therapy. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. Meanwhile, my parents had begun attempting to contact me. They left voicemails that ranged from defensive, "You've always been too sensitive," to minimizing, "Every family has its issues," to guilt-inducing, "After all we've done for you." None showed real understanding or remorse. With Dr. Larson's guidance, I drafted a letter to them explaining my need for distance while I worked through the impact of their treatment. I was clear that I wasn't cutting them off permanently, but needed them to respect my boundaries during this healing period. "I love you both," I wrote at the end, "and I hope someday we can build a healthier relationship. But that requires acknowledgement of the past and a commitment to change in the future." As Thanksgiving approached, the thought of traditional family holidays brought a fresh wave of anxiety. David suggested we create our own tradition instead. "What if we host a chosen family Thanksgiving?" he proposed. "We could invite Jordan and her parents, Aunt Catherine, maybe some of our friends from the hospital who can't go home." The idea immediately lifted a weight from my shoulders. We sent out invitations and planned a menu that incorporated favorite dishes from everyone's families. I took extra shifts in October to ensure I could have the day off. The gathering was everything I needed. Our small apartment was crowded with people who genuinely cared for each other. Jordan's parents brought their famous sweet potato casserole. Aunt Catherine arrived with homemade pies and fierce hugs. Two of my fellow residents who couldn't travel home joined us, bringing international dishes from their cultural backgrounds. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no wondering if my contributions would be acknowledged. Just warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. After dinner, as we all sat with coffee and dessert, Aunt Catherine raised her glass. "To chosen family," she toasted. "And to Sadie, who is becoming the strong, boundary-setting woman I always knew she could be." The validation from these people who saw me clearly and loved me authentically filled a space in my heart that had been empty for too long. The following week brought an unexpected development. My hospital department nominated me for a Resident Excellence Award, citing my patient care during particularly difficult cases. The chief of medicine personally commended my ability to remain compassionate and thorough, despite the demanding schedule. "You have a gift, Dr. Marshall," he told me using my professional title. "Your patients consistently report feeling heard and respected, even when their cases are challenging. That's something we can't teach in medical school." The recognition from my professional community was healing in its own way. Here my work and character were seen and valued. Here I was, enough just as I was. As Christmas approached again, I felt stronger and clearer about my path forward. The journey to healing was just beginning, but I was no longer lost in the woods. I had a compass now pointing towards self-worth and authentic relationships, and away from the destructive pattern of seeking validation, where it would never be adequately given. The 6 months following that pivotal Christmas brought significant changes in my life and relationships. With the support of weekly therapy sessions, I began the slow process of disentangling my sense of worth from my parents' approval. Dr. Larson helped me understand that the pattern of favoritism wasn't something I could have prevented or fixed as a child. Children naturally assume that parental treatment reflects their inherent value, she explained. You interpreted their favoritism toward Melissa as evidence that you were less lovable, when in reality it reflected their limitations, not yours. This perspective shift was powerful, but difficult to internalize after decades of believing otherwise. There were breakthrough moments and setbacks, days when I felt strong in my new understanding, and days when old doubts crept back in. During this period, I maintained limited contact with my parents through occasional text messages and brief phone calls. I was polite but firm in maintaining my boundaries, ending conversations when they became manipulative or dismissive of my feelings. David and I began planning our wedding, deciding on a small ceremony with only those who had consistently supported us. When my mother realized she wasn't being consulted on wedding plans, she called in a panic. "But I'm the mother of the bride," she protested. "I should be helping you choose your dress and the venue." "Mom," I replied calmly, "I need people around me during wedding planning who make me feel supported and valued. Right now, our relationship isn't in that place." This reality check seemed to finally penetrate. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from my father, an actual handwritten letter, not an email or text. His words showed the first real acknowledgement I had seen. "Dear Sadie," he wrote, "I've been reflecting deeply on our conversation and the evidence you presented. At first I was defensive because accepting that we favored Melissa meant accepting that we failed you in fundamental ways. That's a painful truth for any parent to face. But after many sleepless nights and conversations with a counselor I've been seeing, I can no longer deny the pattern you identified. You were right. We consistently prioritized Melissa's needs and achievements over yours. We took your strength and independence as evidence that you needed less from us, rather than recognizing that every child deserves equal support, celebration, and investment. The financial discrepancy alone is indefensible, particularly given your career choice and the good you're doing in the world. I won't make excuses. I can only say that I am deeply, profoundly sorry for the pain we caused and the message we sent about your value in our family. If you're willing, I would like to begin rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms with a clear acknowledgement of past wrongs and a commitment to change going forward. With love and regret, Dad. I read the letter multiple times, emotions washing over me in waves. There was vindication in having my experience finally acknowledged, relief that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the treatment, and a cautious hope that real change might be possible. My mother's journey to recognition was rockier. Her initial response was to become more defensive, claiming that my father was overreacting and that families always have different dynamics with different children. It wasn't until she began seeing her own therapist at my father's urging that she slowly began to recognize the impact of their behavior. Her first attempt at an apology was filled with qualifiers. "I'm sorry if you felt we didn't support you enough, and we did our best with what we knew at the time." But gradually, she too began to show genuine remorse and understanding. During one phone call, she admitted something significant. "I think I was intimidated by you, Sadie," she confessed. "You were so bright, so driven, so sure of yourself in ways I never was. Melissa was more like me, uncertain and needing validation. I understood her. But that's not an excuse for failing to celebrate and support you equally." These acknowledgments were meaningful, but I remained cautious. Dr. Larson reminded me that real change would need to be demonstrated consistently over time, not just in words, but in actions. My relationship with Melissa evolved as well. After several more conversations, she began to understand her role in the family dynamic more clearly. "I got used to being the center of attention," she acknowledged during a lunch meeting. "It was comfortable having Mom and Dad focused on my needs. I never considered what that meant for you because it worked for me." This honest self-reflection marked a new chapter in our sisterhood. We would never have the close relationship that might have developed in a healthier family system, but we could build something new based on adult understanding and respect. As wedding plans progressed, I made a significant decision. I asked Aunt Catherine to walk me down the aisle instead of my father. "You were there for me when I was invisible to them," I told her when she tearfully accepted. "You saw my value when they couldn't. That means everything to me." When I informed my parents of this decision, it was a painful but necessary reality check. My father was visibly hurt but nodded with understanding. "I haven't earned that privilege," he said quietly. "I hope someday to rebuild enough trust that you'll let me support you in other ways." This response showed me he was truly beginning to understand the consequences of years of favoritism. In the hospital, my professional confidence grew alongside my personal healing. I began trusting my instincts more, with patients receiving positive feedback from attending physicians and gratitude from those under my care. A particularly meaningful moment came when I successfully diagnosed a rare condition in a teenage patient after multiple other doctors had missed it. Her parents' tearful thanks reminded me why I had chosen medicine despite all the obstacles. "You saved our daughter's life," her father said, gripping my hand. "We'll never forget what you've done for our family." The contrast between their recognition of my value and my own parents' historical indifference was striking. But now, instead of feeling that familiar ache, I felt a sense of purpose and pride in my chosen path. David continued to be my strongest supporter, celebrating my successes and providing comfort during setbacks. His unwavering belief in me helped anchor my growing sense of self-worth. "I've always seen how extraordinary you are," he told me one night as we looked through wedding venue photos. "I'm just glad you're starting to see it too." As I continued healing, I recognized that my experience could help others. With the hospital's approval, I started a small support group for medical staff dealing with family trauma. The response was overwhelming, revealing how many of my colleagues were carrying similar burdens while caring for patients. The group became a safe space for sharing stories and coping strategies. One resident confided that hearing about my journey had given her the courage to set boundaries with her emotionally abusive mother. Another shared that he had always believed he was alone in his experience of being the unfavorite child. Slowly, my parents began demonstrating change through actions, not just words. They made efforts to learn about my medical specialty, asking thoughtful questions about my work. They offered financial help toward our wedding, which I initially declined, but later accepted as a small gesture of their commitment to more equal treatment. When my father received an unexpected bonus at work, he called to tell me he wanted to help with my student loans. "It's not nearly enough to make up for the disparity over the years," he acknowledged, "but it's a start." The most significant test came at a family dinner 6 months after the confrontation. My parents had invited David and me, along with Melissa and Brad, for what my mother called a fresh start gathering. I arrived apprehensive, half expecting the old patterns to reassert themselves. But throughout the evening, I noticed my parents making conscious efforts to engage equally with both daughters. When Melissa interrupted me at one point, my mother gently redirected the conversation back to what I had been saying. When Brad mentioned Melissa's work, my father asked equally interested questions about my recent hospital cases. These were small moments, but they represented the beginning of new family patterns. There was awkwardness and occasional tension, but also genuine effort and moments of connection that felt healthier than anything we had experienced before. As we prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Sadie," she whispered. "Not just for what you do, but for who you are. For your strength in helping us see what we couldn't see ourselves." Those words, which I had longed to hear throughout my childhood, brought tears to my eyes. They couldn't erase the past, but they offered hope for a different future. In the car afterward, David asked how I was feeling. "Cautiously optimistic," I replied honestly. "Real healing takes time. Trust takes even longer. But I think we're on a path I never thought was possible." As spring turned to summer, I continued my journey of personal growth alongside my medical career. The lessons I had learned about self-worth, boundaries, and chosen family had transformed me in profound ways. I was no longer the person who measured her value by parental approval or achievement alone. I had found a stronger foundation in self-acceptance and authentic connections. The night before our wedding, surrounded by friends who had become family, I reflected on the tumultuous year that had brought me to this point. The pain of that Christmas revelation had been excruciating, but it had also been the catalyst for growth and change that might never have happened otherwise. Sometimes I realized the most painful gifts are also the most transformative. Today, as I look back on the journey that began with that devastating Christmas, I'm struck by how far I've come. The healing hasn't been linear, and there are still moments when old wounds feel fresh, but I'm no longer defined by my family's favoritism. The first 6 months after setting boundaries with my parents were the hardest. There were days when guilt would creep in, when cultural expectations about family obligations would make me question my decision. Dr. Larson helped me recognize these thoughts as part of my conditioning, not accurate reflections of reality. "You're not abandoning your family by requiring respect," she reminded me. "You're inviting them into a healthier relationship." My wedding day became an unexpected turning point in my healing journey. We chose a small garden ceremony with only 60 guests, people who had demonstrated genuine care and support throughout our lives. Aunt Catherine walked me down the aisle as planned, her face radiating pride and love. My parents were present, sitting quietly in the front row. They had respected my wishes without complaint, a meaningful demonstration of their commitment to change. When I reached the altar where David waited, I glanced back and saw my father wiping tears from his eyes. It wasn't the traditional father-daughter moment, but it felt honest and appropriate for where we were in our journey. At the reception, my mother approached me with an envelope. "This isn't a wedding gift," she clarified. "It's something I should have given you a long time ago." Inside was a check that would cover nearly a third of my remaining student loans, along with a note. "This doesn't erase the past inequality, but it's a step toward making things right. Your dedication to healing others has always been worthy of our full support. We're sorry we didn't see that sooner. Love, Mom and Dad." The financial help was meaningful, but more important was the explicit acknowledgement of the inequality and their failure to support my career as they had supported Melissa's. No excuses, no minimizing, just ownership of their actions and a concrete step toward change. Our relationship continued to evolve in the months following the wedding. There were still uncomfortable moments and occasional slides into old patterns, but now I had the tools and confidence to address them directly. And more often than not, my parents were receptive to the feedback, demonstrating a genuine desire to build something healthier. Melissa and I found a new dynamic as well. We would never have the close sisterly bond that might have developed in different circumstances, but we established a respectful adult relationship. She became more aware of her tendency to center herself in conversations and made visible efforts to create space for others. When she announced her pregnancy 6 months after our wedding, she was careful to check in about how I was feeling rather than assuming everyone would be focused exclusively on her news. My professional life flourished alongside this personal healing. As I completed my residency and began a fellowship in emergency medicine, I found myself approaching my work with more balance and boundaries. I was still dedicated and thorough, but I no longer felt I had to be perfect to be worthy. This healthier approach made me a better doctor. I connected more authentically with patients, acknowledging the limits of medicine while providing the best care possible. My attending physicians noted my growth with one writing in my evaluation. Dr. Marshall combines exceptional clinical skills with rare emotional intelligence and communication abilities. Patients consistently report feeling both well-treated and well-cared for under her supervision. David and I settled into married life, creating our own family traditions that prioritized connection and authenticity. We continued hosting chosen family gatherings for holidays, now sometimes including my parents and Melissa's family, among the friends and colleagues who had supported us through difficult times. The support group I had started for healthcare workers dealing with family trauma grew from a handful of participants to a regular gathering of 15 to 20 people. I brought in guest speakers, including therapists specializing in family systems, and watched as participants found solidarity and healing in shared experiences. One of the most profound lessons from this journey has been understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It doesn't mean allowing the same patterns to continue. Instead, forgiveness has meant releasing the burden of resentment while still holding firm boundaries. It has meant accepting that my parents did the best they could with their own limitations, while also requiring accountability and change. When my sister gave birth to her daughter Emma, I witnessed another dimension of healing. My parents were understandably thrilled with their first grandchild, but they made conscious efforts to include David and me in family gatherings, to ask about our lives and work to demonstrate that they valued all members of the family. During one visit with baby Emma, my mother said something that showed how far she had come in her understanding. "I'm trying to be very mindful about not repeating patterns. Emma will have cousins someday, and I want to be the kind of grandmother who loves and celebrates each child equally." This awareness, this commitment to doing better with the next generation, felt like a form of redemption for the past. My own healing continues. There are still triggers, still moments when I find myself slipping into old thought patterns of needing to earn love through achievement. But now I recognize these thoughts more quickly and can redirect them with self-compassion. The journey has taught me that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us, even those who should love us most. Our value is inherent, unchangeable, and complete regardless of external validation or acknowledgement. I've learned that we can't change our past or control how others behave, but we can set boundaries that protect our well-being. We can surround ourselves with people who see and celebrate us authentically. We can break cycles of harm by refusing to accept unequal treatment and by committing to healthier patterns in our own relationships. Most importantly, I've discovered that healing doesn't mean erasing scars, but learning to carry them with grace. The experiences that once felt like they would break me have instead become the foundation for deeper empathy, stronger boundaries, and more authentic connections. If you're struggling with family favoritism or any form of conditional love, please know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. You deserve to be valued for exactly who you are, not what you achieve or provide. Building a life centered on self-worth rather than external validation is possible even after years of believing otherwise. I'd love to hear your stories of healing from family wounds or setting boundaries that protected your well-being.